For years, Lady Louise Windsor walked within the shadows of palace walls, dutiful, poised, yet unnamed in the grand tapestry of royal recognition. Despite her lineage as Queen Elizabeth II's granddaughter, her HRH status was quietly withheld, a decision cloaked in modernization, or so we were told. But as new forces rise and old alliances fracture, the silence surrounding Louise's role is about to be shattered in the most explosive way imaginable. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. She was born into privilege but not power, into a legacy yet denied the title that should have been hers by right. Queen Elizabeth's 1,960 letters patent made it clear children of the sons of the sovereign would carry HRH and princely titles. Yet when Edward and Sophie welcomed their daughter, they publicly declined that right. The world saw it as a modern gesture, a break from royal rigidity, but in the hush of palace halls, there were murmurs of something deeper, an internal resistance to a future that included a bold, educated, and quietly formidable young woman stepping into the spotlight. Louise, ever graceful, never questioned the choice. She carried herself with the rare elegance of service without entitlement, mastering carriage driving under the eye of Prince Philip, standing tall at ceremonial events, and remaining unwavering in her devotion to the crown. But silence can be mistaken for acquiescence, and her silence had been growing louder by the year. What few noticed were the subtle signs of movement, a quiet trip to Balmoral under the guise of a holiday, but with no public sightings, only a blurred image of Louise near the chapel, alongside Princess Anne. Those who know the institution's pulse whispered of private counsel between the two women. Anne, the Princess Royal, known for duty and disdain for theatrics, had become increasingly protective of Louise. She saw in her a spirit untamed by public life yet refined by royal discipline. And then there were the shifting dynamics within Camilla's influence circle. Multiple insiders have claimed the Queen Consort's allies lobbied to keep titles frozen, ensuring that only her bloodline via the Parker Bowles side would maintain rising influence. Any move to elevate Louise, they feared, would weaken that trajectory. But if palace politics tried to suppress her ascent, another figure was beginning to awaken to the injustice. Prince William, once bound by the unspoken rules of deference to his father, had grown increasingly emboldened. The quiet indignity done to his cousin had not escaped his notice. He knew the cost of sidelining a Windsor-born woman raised in quiet discipline while others were paraded for appearances. Sources close to his circle suggest that the future king began making inquiries, seeking precedent, and probing the legal grey zones of royal status. And in these questions lay a dangerous truth. It was not the monarch who would make the boldest move, it was the heir. But if Lady Louise was once the forgotten Windsor, what exactly triggered the future king to break ranks and at what cost? Behind closed doors, Prince William made a decision that would ignite quiet fury within the royal institution. In a hushed, unscheduled meeting at Clarence House without Camilla or Charles present, William summoned two figures, Lady Louise and the Archbishop of Canterbury. What followed would set in motion a chain of defiance that rewrote titles, authority, and the future of the monarchy. For months, William had been seething in silence. While he performed his royal duties with flawless precision, something deeper simmered beneath his calm exterior, a growing frustration with the hollowing of tradition and the manipulation of legacy under the guise of modernization. He had watched decisions be made, not for the integrity of the crown, but for the convenience of courtiers loyal to Camilla's rise. Titles had been frozen, hierarchies blurred, and the rightful recognition of those closest to the late Queen, like Lady Louise, was buried beneath a carefully managed silence. William could no longer tolerate it. The monarchy, in his eyes, was drifting from its core, and it was time to reclaim its soul. The decision to involve the Archbishop of Canterbury was deliberate, symbolic, and politically dangerous. William knew this could not be just a family adjustment. It had to be sanctified, legally insulated, and spiritually blessed. The conversation behind those stone walls went far beyond mere formality. The Archbishop did not just ask about protocol, he questioned purpose. Was this about power or preservation? William's answer, reportedly, was simple. This is about truth. and truth cannot be suppressed for convenience. Then, with the Archbishop's nod, he turned to Lady Louise. She had not been told the full nature of the meeting. Her eyes reportedly widened when she was asked directly if she would accept restoration of her full birthright under royal seal. Her response was silence, but it wasn't hesitation, it was weight. She knew that a title is never just a name in the Windsor family, it's a reckoning. Later that evening, aides were thrown into chaos. Without the typical flow of memos or senior clearance, internal orders had already been issued under William's personal seal. A confidential directive titled Protocol Windsor Resurgence was logged within the Crown Chamber archives, its contents encrypted, restricted to only 4 people: William, Edward, the Archbishop, and the Keeper of Royal Decrees. The language of the document reportedly invoked Clause 3 of Appendix Windsor 4, a rarely used clause that allows the heir to the throne to issue emergency legacy preservation actions when structural imbalances threaten the monarchy's internal cohesion. In simpler terms, it gave William the power to act unilaterally when he believed the foundation was under threat. When Camilla was informed, it wasn't through royal correspondence or a formal update. It was through a whispered mention during a floral arrangement meeting in Clarence House. Her expression, according to insiders, shifted from confusion to disbelief and finally to unrestrained fury. She stormed out of the meeting, reportedly refusing further engagements for the day. But her reaction only confirmed what William had feared all along. This wasn't just about one title. This was about control. And he had just taken a match to the carefully curated order she had spent years fortifying. But William's bold stroke would mean nothing without a ceremony, and Louise's reaction stunned even those who knew her best. When informed of William's intervention, Lady Louise didn't celebrate. Instead, she wept. At Bagshot Park, her private response was one of heartbreak and hesitation. Years of being overlooked had taught her humility, not entitlement. But in those silent halls, a deeper fear was rising. Accepting the title could divide her family forever. Louise had lived her entire life on the periphery of royal power, deliberately removed from the obligations and scrutiny that came with titles. Her mother, Sophie, had made that decision not out of rebellion, but out of fierce maternal instinct, a desire to give her daughter a life unburdened by monarchy's weight. That decision, respected by the late Queen, had shaped Louise's character in quiet ways. She had never demanded recognition, never courted cameras or ceremony. She found dignity in silence. So when William took a stand and thrust her into the center of a constitutional firestorm, Louise did not react with ambition. She reacted with grief, for in that moment, her loyalty to her mother's protective wishes clashed violently with the pull of duty to the crown and the legacy of her grandmother. Sophie, ever composed, was reportedly shaken when she found her daughter alone in the garden, eyes swollen, letter unopened in hand. William's message had arrived that morning, delivered not by courier, but by Princess Charlotte herself, an intentional gesture of familial unity. The envelope bore no seal, only Louise's name in William's handwriting. Inside was not an order or persuasion, but an appeal. He wrote of heritage, of Elizabeth's vision, and of the risk he had taken on her behalf. But Sophie knew words weren't enough. She urged her daughter to seek guidance not from advisors, but from women who understood the crown's dual-weight duty and sacrifice, Anne and Catherine. Louise made no calls, no official visits were logged, but within 48 hours, she was seen slipping into Queen Elizabeth's private chapel, a space untouched since the monarch's passing. No cameras, no record, just silence and prayer. She stayed over an hour. Edward, meanwhile, remained wordless, not in ignorance, but in choice. He had seen the growing storm. He knew Camilla's resentment. He knew the Crown Chamber was already under strain, and he knew that if he spoke too soon, if he urged Louise forward, his words would be seen as political, not paternal. So he said nothing, and Louise, hearing only his silence, interpreted it as both fear and faith. But the outside world had already begun to stir. A junior aide, perhaps seeking glory or revenge, leaked word to the press of a pending investiture. the tabloids exploded. Windsor wildcard, blared one headline. A new princess rises, read another. The media had declared the moment before Louise herself had accepted it. But even as Louise hesitated, royal machinery had already begun turning, and a sealed velvet pouch changed everything. Inside a sealed velvet pouch stored beneath the floorboards of the Windsor vault was a handwritten letter, Queen Elizabeth's personal note to Lady Louise. It was never meant to surface until the Queen's 100th birthday, but William ordered its release early. What it contained was nothing short of revolutionary. The Queen's own wish for Louise to bear the title of HRH and Princess, with conditions. William's boldness had not ended with the meeting at Clarence House. He had taken a further step, one that shattered precedent and startled even the most seasoned royal advisers. Tucked deep within Appendix Windsor 4, filed under the code name Ascension envelope, lay a document unknown to nearly all. Only the sovereign, the keeper of royal seals, and the heir apparent had authority over its contents. That file, last updated 5 months before the Queen's passing, bore her unmistakable signature, and within it, a directive that would shift the future of the Windsor name. The letter, penned in the Queen's distinctive green ink, was sealed not with a monarchical stamp but with her personal signet. It wasn't institutional, it was intimate, and in its language, Elizabeth had reached across time to choose Louise not as a fallback, but as a symbol. In the letter, the Queen referred to the legacy of Princess Alice, her great-grandmother, who had served both quietly and profoundly as a vessel of strength through personal exile and war. She described Louise in similar terms, unpolished in title, but gleaming in principle. The Queen wrote that should the family find itself in moral disarray or spiritual drift, the girl who bears the patience of Philip and the eyes of our house shall be named Guardian of Windsor Grace. That title, untouched since the Victorian era, carried no operational power but immense symbolic weight. In Elizabeth's eyes, it was not governance that mattered. It was preservation of integrity. She had seen something in Louise, something the public had not yet understood. And with that, she granted her granddaughter not just a title, but a legacy. The moment the letter was read aloud inside the private chapel at Windsor, with Anne and Catherine at Louise's side, tears fell in silence. It wasn't the grandeur of the language, it was the clarity of the Queen's belief. Louise had not sought this. But now, she could no longer deny what had been placed upon her. Anne reportedly stood and placed her hand on Louise's shoulder without a word. Catherine, who had walked this tightrope of honor and expectation for years, whispered simply, "It was always you." But not everyone welcomed the letter's revelation. Camilla, upon hearing of the document's release, issued a formal objection. She claimed William had breached protocol by unsealing what was intended for a future commemoration. Her protest cited procedural overreach and the risk of unbalancing the royal succession narrative. But her fury only amplified the letter's power, for within the Queen's green ink, traditionally reserved for her most personal and unalterable sentiments, was a clear truth. This was not palace policy. This was the sovereign's soul, and once made public, it could not be undone. With the Queen's voice speaking from beyond, the monarchy was now bound to act, and the Crown Chamber stirred with unexpected alliances. Within the heavily guarded walls of the Crown Chamber, a vote was scheduled, and then abruptly cancelled. For the first time in decades, royal advisers fractured into open disagreement. Would the monarchy allow an unapproved shift in titles, or would William's move be enshrined without council oversight? The air inside the Crown Chamber was different that day, heavier. Lines that had remained invisible for years were suddenly sharp and immovable. The divide was not just philosophical, it was generational, ideological, and deeply personal. On one side stood the traditionalists, loyal to the strict constitutional rhythm of the monarchy, slow, deliberate, and governed by layered precedent. On the other stood William, bolstered by a younger coalition of modernists who viewed the preservation of royal legacy as a living act, not a ceremonial echo. This wasn't a debate about Lady Louise alone. It had become a fight over what the future monarchy would look like and who would be allowed to shape it. The breaking point came when the Duke of Norfolk, the highest-ranking peer in ceremonial affairs and keeper of royal precedent, walked out mid-discussion. Known for his iron commitment to tradition, his abrupt departure sent shockwaves through the room. Moments later, a silence fell until Princess Anne stood and issued a thunderous statement that stunned even the Archbishop. "If not Louise, then who stands for Windsor legacy?" It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. Her voice didn't tremble, her authority didn't waver, and her message was clear. Lineage without loyalty meant nothing. Louise had proven herself not through ambition, but through quiet integrity, exactly the kind of strength the crown needed. Camilla's camp, however, saw only threat. Her closest allies, including a senior member of the royal household board, issued an immediate warning. If the crown allowed this title restoration without formal council approval, they would delay all future investitures, including scheduled honours involving her grandchildren. It was a retaliatory move, framed as procedural prudence, but everyone knew it was personal. Camilla's influence was being tested and potentially diminished by an heir who refused to be restrained by custom. The Archbishop of Canterbury, sensing the collision ahead, offered a compromise. Louise's title could be spiritually blessed in a private capacity, but not formally proclaimed before the public. It was a loophole, a delay tactic. But William was no longer interested in compromise. With one stroke of his provisional seal, William authorized a title recognition pending full ratification. The order did not require a vote under Appendix Windsor 4. It simply enacted the Queen's personal will, invoking emergency powers meant to preserve institutional identity in times of internal fracture. By law, Louise was now Her Royal Highness, Princess Louise of Wessex. It was done. No ballot, no ceremony, just a signature beneath centuries of silence. As tensions spilled into public view, one location was chosen to anchor the moment, and the Crown sent a summons north. There were no cameras, no media, just 12 people, a royal banner, and an oath whispered in the rain-soaked air of Balmoral. In an untelevised ceremony deep within the Scottish Highlands, Lady Louise accepted her new role. But her whisper of, "Yes, I accept the name Windsor," echoed louder than any broadcast. The decision to hold the investiture at Balmoral was not logistical, it was spiritual. This was Queen Elizabeth's sanctuary, the one place where the monarchy breathed without spectacle. It was where decisions of the soul, not the state, were made. William chose it precisely for that reason. This was not a performance. It was an anointing. Only a handful were permitted to witness what unfolded that morning. Princess Anne stood beside her niece in stoic solidarity. Catherine watched with a quiet reverence, holding her daughter Charlotte's hand, knowing what this moment might mean for her someday. Edward was there, silent and still, bearing the gravity of both a father's pride and the memory of the choice he once made to shield his daughter from this very destiny. The Duke of Kent, the last senior royal of his generation, was summoned not for duty, but for continuity. He alone had witnessed Queen Elizabeth's own coronation as a child. His presence turned the moment from personal to eternal. Louise knelt not before a throne, but before a wooden altar imported from Queen Victoria's own private chapel. The Archbishop of Canterbury, wearing no formal vestments, placed Queen Alexandra's prayer ring on her hand, a ring that had vanished from public record since 1911, kept hidden in the sovereign's vault. With her right hand placed on Victoria's altar cross, still bearing a burn mark from the 1940. Blitz Louise recited an oath, written in Queen Elizabeth's handwriting. She did not proclaim herself a princess. She did not demand a crown. She accepted the name Windsor, not as privilege, but as burden, history, and promise. The vow was recorded not with cameras, but with ink. One royal artist, chosen by the Archbishop himself, was permitted to sketch the moment. That drawing, in graphite and ash, now rests sealed in the royal archives, its image known only to those who stood within that sacred circle. And when it was done, when the final words were spoken and the rain lifted ever so slightly, William stepped forward, unrolled the royal proclamation, and declared the formal restoration. Her Royal Highness Princess Louise of Wessex. There was no applause, no announcement, no trumpets, just the sound of Balmoral breathing again. as if the estate itself had been waiting for this moment. And yet, while this silent coronation breathed new life into the monarchy's legacy, not all corners of the crown embraced it. The page had turned, but not all were ready to read the next chapter. But just as Louise stepped forward into royal light, an echo from the shadows arrived. Camilla had issued a countermeasure. Camilla was not done. In a rare move, she penned a formal objection, citing violation of precedent and undermining the king's advisory board. But behind her words was something far more threatening, an ultimatum that would shake Charles, test Edward, and put Catherine in a dangerous position. Her statement came in the form of a sealed document delivered directly to the Royal Household Board and signed with a title that hadn't been used publicly in months: Queen Consort, Regent status. That detail alone raised alarms. Regent status was a dormant clause, one reserved only for transitional or incapacitated monarchies. Camilla was sending a message. She was positioning herself not just as Charles's wife, but as a de facto gatekeeper of royal legitimacy. The core of her protest demanded that no new royal titles, regardless of intent or origin, be recognized without the king's explicit, written signature. She cited procedural overreach, accused William of circumventing governance, and warned that this unchecked authority would fracture the chain of trust between sovereign, consort, and heir. But while Camilla made her move through paperwork and precedent, Edward responded with fire. Within hours of the objection reaching the board, a private internal memo from Edward was leaked intentionally or otherwise. In it, he stated plainly, "I stand with my daughter." The statement didn't merely reject Camilla's protest. It shattered decades of quiet diplomacy. Edward had, until now, played the role of the silent stabilizer, but this was different. This was blood. His message reverberated through the palace corridors like a thunderclap, and he was not standing alone. Catherine, who had remained cautiously silent through the initial conflict, now entered the storm. Her words, though whispered to aides, were quickly repeated, confirmed, and documented. No crown commands the soul of a Windsor. It wasn't a political remark. It was personal and devastating. Catherine, the future queen, had drawn a line. She was not defending hierarchy, she was defending legacy. And in doing so, she placed herself directly opposite Camilla in what was now an all-out institutional duel. Inside the palace, allegiances hardened. Outside, the public was beginning to sense that something had snapped behind the gates. Charles, caught in the crossfire, faltered. He was presented with the opportunity to assert his role, sign the protest, and overrule the title's formalization. But he didn't. Whether out of fatigue, fear, or foresight, the king abstained. He neither approved nor condemned. And in that vacuum, William's legal team moved swiftly. Invoking a clause buried deep within the framework of legacy preservation known as Protocol Clarion, they argued that in times of royal ambiguity or deadlock, the heir has the right to act in defense of monarchical continuity. It was rare, it was risky, but it was binding. With one legal trigger, William rendered Camilla's objection irrelevant. The title stood, the protest dissolved. But it wasn't over, because while the monarchy battled itself in silence, the nation had been watching, and what came next was something no one inside the palace had prepared for. But what no one anticipated was how the public would respond, and the monarchy hadn't seen this kind of outpouring in decades. They called her quiet, they called her shy, but now they call her Princess Louise. Across Britain and beyond, the public response was overwhelming. Candlelight vigils, children's drawings, and handwritten letters flooded the palace gates. The youngest Windsor had awakened something ancient, the public's fierce yearning for authenticity, grace, and hope. Within 72 hours of the Balmoral ceremony, something unprecedented unfolded. Polling firms scrambled to capture the shift, and what they found stunned even the monarchy's most seasoned advisors. Louise, who had previously floated beneath the radar of public consciousness, had surged to become the second most beloved member of the royal family, surpassed only by Catherine herself. It wasn't orchestrated. It wasn't strategized. It was organic, raw, emotional. People saw in her something they hadn't seen in years: purity, a sense of service without spectacle, nobility without noise, and that quiet strength, once dismissed as timidity, was now recast as the very soul of Windsor resilience. On social media, Princess Louise exploded into a global phenomenon, trending in over 40 countries within hours. Not as a meme, not as controversy, but as inspiration. Artists painted tributes. Schools wrote to her. Former Commonwealth nations held candle-lit parades. The youngest royal had become the most ancient symbol. What followed was even more surreal. Photographs of the late Queen Elizabeth walking beside a young Louise resurfaced and were now viewed with prophetic reverence. Analysts reinterpreted the Queen's posture, her gaze, her rare smile in those images. Suddenly, it all seemed preordained. The public wasn't just reacting, they were rewriting memory in real time, and it was rewriting the monarchy's future with it. Behind palace walls, something else happened. Messages, discreet but heartfelt, arrived from across Europe, from the Greek royal family, from the House of Glücksburg in Denmark, even from the Habsburg descendants of Austria. Not formal letters, but personal notes. Congratulations, blessings, acknowledgement. These families recognized something others had missed. Louise wasn't just a Windsor. She was a bridge, a quiet heir to a lineage that crossed borders and centuries. Her elevation, unexpected as it was, reminded the world that royalty could still stir something sacred. Perhaps most symbolic of all was a letter published not by the crown, but by a child. Princess Charlotte, barely in the public eye herself, wrote and released a handwritten note to Louise, calling her "my second beacon." The phrase echoed like prophecy. If Catherine was the first, then Louise had become the second, not as a rival, but as a complement. Two women, one in waiting, one now risen, anchoring the monarchy's moral direction in a time of institutional doubt. In response to the overwhelming outpouring, William commissioned a new portrait of Louise to be painted for Windsor Castle. But there was one striking detail: Camilla was not invited to the unveiling. The message, though unstated, was unmistakable. The future of the monarchy was being shaped in new hands, and while tradition endured, its guardianship had changed. But even as celebrations swelled, one final revelation buried in the Queen's own diary would redefine everything we thought we knew. Deep within the royal archives, a forgotten page from Queen Elizabeth's private diary was uncovered. Dated just months before her passing, the entry speaks not of kings or succession, but of one girl she believed could revive the soul of Windsor. That girl was Louise. This wasn't just a title, it was destiny fulfilled. The discovery was not planned. It wasn't part of any sanctioned royal review. The Duchess of Edinburgh, in quiet reflection after Louise's investiture, had requested access to a small sealed volume, a personal diary Elizabeth had kept during her final summers at Balmoral. The entries were sparse, handwritten, and marked with the Queen's unique shorthand. But one page, buried near the end, stood apart. It was uncharacteristically poetic, almost prophetic, and it named no monarch, no consort, no heir. It spoke only of a girl of silent fire, the Queen wrote, born under Balmoral stars, who carries the echo of Alice and the steadiness of Margaret. No surname, no title, just a spirit the Queen believed would one day restore the grace she feared was fading from her family's name. When the Duchess shared this diary page with William, it was not in a meeting room or council chamber, but in private, without cameras, aides, or protocol. William read the words once, then again, and something inside him settled. This had not been a gamble. It had been a calling. What he had done was not rebellion, it was realignment. Later, as he showed the page to Catherine, she didn't speak at first. Then, with tears not of sorrow but of clarity, she said the words that would forever seal the moment. William ordered the excerpt carved into marble and placed within the quiet shadows of St. George's Chapel, next to a candle that never extinguishes. It reads, "She need not be loud to be known. She need only carry the fire long enough for us to remember where we came from." Beneath it, only a name. Louise. But the story did not end there. With the Queen's hidden blessing now made visible, a new chapter began to write itself. Plans were already forming for Princess Louise to accompany select Commonwealth tours not as a headline figure, but as a silent ambassador of legacy. Nations long estranged from the crown would meet not the grandeur of gold coaches, but the sincerity of a young woman who had never asked for power, only purpose. She would travel light, speak little, and yet be heard across oceans. Her very presence would be the message. And so, in a monarchy built on rules, legacy, and silent wars, one girl's name, Princess Louise, now echoes as the future's fiercest whisper. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.